Servant leadership is a concept that maybe its time has come. I want to talk a little bit about the aspect of the servant leadership. It's over 2,000 years old. So we start looking at the aspect of what is a servant leadership. A lot of times we've had a significant change in how we manage. If you go back as recently as the 1990s, when the internet just started becoming popular and pushing the boundaries of every single part of our society, the reality of it really came down to is that the supervisor used to be the one that would be the distributor of the information. Information would come down as a report or direction from above. It would be written down, and the supervisor would spend a lot of time talking to people about the information because they own the information. Now, with the internet and high digital access on simply every single aspect of our lives, the reality is we all have access to massive amounts of information if the organization chooses to let us have it. Now, all of a sudden, the supervisor, that role changed. We went from having a supervisor with a span of control, in other words, how many employees they had. Normally, the norm used to be between 5 and 7 employees, and you would handle that. Some of us I had a situation where I had myself and my assistant, we had 52 employees. So we had them both, we split it up. I managed 30, he handled 20. That was huge, except for the fact we had to figure out how to go about doing that because of the fact we had to distribute information in a different way than the old style of actually having this narrow control. Now we have lots of access, and we also have a concept. Now, every generation, they all come out and say, we want to make a difference. Everybody wants that. That is not owned by any specific generations. We've all had that. Once upon a time, I recall hearing a commercial out there, I want to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. That was a Coca-Cola commercial, and it seemed to define an entire generation. But every generation wants to teach the whole world to sing and get along in perfect harmony, and it just depends on the methodology as how you go about doing that. And the only way you can really handle that is with servant leadership. I want to explore the topic because it really is different. It speaks a lot to the heart, the power of humility. Although, how do you have the power of humility in a day and age where everything is driven by social media, which is so massively narcissistic? If you look on society, you'll see a lot of the different mental illnesses are coming from deep-seated narcissism, which really has come, a lot of it, from social media, where people depict themselves as having this perfect life, and their real life isn't perfect at all, but they use that as their public image because they have to look good to everybody else. So the reality of the narcissism that we have today is totally the opposite of servant leadership. But I'm not certain that means that we should ignore it because of the fact that we probably have more potential today with the aspect of not holding that knowledge now to implement servant leadership. This won't appeal to everybody. Some people thirst for power. They thirst for being the center of attention. That is not the focus of servant leadership. Servant leadership is a totally different critter out there because of the fact that you're going to be bringing your team together. You're going to be sharing with them, and you're going to be saying, how can I help you succeed? It's a different dialogue than saying, your job here today is this. You have to do this today over here. With you being the center of attention and authority, if you can delegate more and more, how can I help you today? How can I help you succeed? How can I help you here? That is the core of the whole concept of empowering leadership and also ethical leadership. Now, ethical leadership, we've talked previously in the aspect of what does that mean. Ethical leadership, the ethics of the organization come from the top. They do not percolate up from the bottom. They come from the top, and people start duplicating the values of the people at top, and that's how you get success in the organization. If you have an unethical leadership, and you're uncomfortable with it, your best bet is to get out of that organization as fast as you can, because you'll either fight against it or you'll join one or the other, because ethics really comes from the top. If you have an organization that you truly believe in, whatever that means, then all of a sudden you'll sit down and enjoy that, and servant leadership can become a tool in that organization. We call it the leader-member exchange, LMX model of leadership, where leaders have different relationships with different subordinates. This is exactly what we talked about on contingency. you handle this person over here. You got to be more direct with them. This one, you're more consultative with them. This one, you can leave alone and they'll do their job fine for the next 17 years. And you know they will because they have a conscience about doing it and doing it well. You'll have all these different aspects of it because of the fact that we have different relationships with different people. And this especially is appropriate for servant leadership. But the one caution here is that servant leadership, a lot of times people get so close to their employees that they blur the boundary between employee and supervisor. This is the true danger of servant leadership, which is why I'm putting it here. Social distancing, sometimes you become so close to an employee, you go out to lunch, you have after work different activities together. Sometimes you see too much of each other, but the issue really comes down to, can you maintain objectivity, fairness, and authority with servant leadership? This is probably the biggest difficulty here because sometimes you get so close to somebody and they're not doing well or they're stealing something or whatever, and you tend to overlook them because you want to maintain that relationship. At all times, you need to be the one in charge because you'll be the one held accountable if you don't hold them accountable. It's a big deal over here. We talked about that. We want to make sure that we have unbiased decision making. You're treating everybody equally because each one of us is a unique individual person on planet Earth. That also is part of the philosophy of servant leadership. This reinforces the leader's position and respect. Be careful about getting too close on a personal basis. I know this sounds awful. When I first heard about it, I reacted almost violently in the aspect of, you're wrong, you're wrong. And then I experienced a couple times, I had to discipline a couple employees, and I was probably too close to them at the time. You have to learn that you will be held accountable in the organization, and that's a big deal. You need to hold them accountable, and don't sit down there and sacrifice your life then for their error and mistakes that they're doing. You make certain that you help them be successful, and that is your job. Promote the professional workplace, have clear communications, set boundaries, expectations, apply rules and policies uniformly, which is a real critical part on servant leadership. Make certain you're helping everybody, but every once in a while, people will take advantage of your helpfulness. Make certain that when it's necessary, that you make it clear that you are the boss. I want to serve others and the organization, not myself. This is exactly what servant leadership is about. Narcissism has no place at all in servant leadership. As a matter of fact, the narcissistic leader is the anathema of the servant leader. There is no middle ground on it. They really are, it's all about me, and you have all this going on over here, and then you have the servant leader over here. I want to help others in the organization, not myself. Two totally different themes. Servant leadership is not for everybody. You look on goals, you want to focus on listening, empathize with other people's feelings, focus on the healing and suffering people can have, self-awareness of strengths and weaknesses. Too often we have positive psychology leaking over into the whole world saying, everything's okay, everything's okay. No. Sometimes things are wrong, you got to fix them. That's what the world is. Use persuasion rather than authority to influence others. That's a characteristic. And it's a hard blur sometimes in an organization, but you have to be much more conceptual, look big picture. How do you want to develop this person to fit in the organization? Look for future outcomes. Be committed to grow the people that you have. But to do this, you have to have these 5 key qualities. High self-awareness. You have to be comfortable in your own skin. That sounds good. Okay, but it's kind of hard. A lot of us suffer with self-image issues even into our 40s and 50s. Be open to feedback because no matter what happens, you are opening yourself up for personal criticism with this style of leadership. If somebody says something negative to you, you need to sit back there and take them back. One time I had this unusual thing. I had an employee, and the employee didn't work in my department directly, but he was going through a time in his family. He had multiple children, and his wife had a second round of breast cancer, and she was in major physical trouble. So my wife and I talked about the aspect of let's sit down and let's provide. We made a commitment, and it was a big one, that every single Monday we would provide them the main course or the menu just to get the monkey off their back. So I made that offer to him, and his response was, no, I don't want your help at all. We're going to get through this on our own. And I mean, I was surprised at the ferocity of his comments to the point that, okay, I'll never do that again. That whole aspect of, though, he was reacting over fighting the cancer and they're going to get through it on their own, and they did it. She did pass away, and you had that whole thing, and a year later, it took him to come back and he apologized. But in the meantime, I withdrew because of that feedback that all of a sudden I tried to help somebody in the aspect of doing this. You have to have an appreciation for others where they're at. You have to have a low self-focus. It's not all about me. It's about everybody else in the organization. And you have to have an appreciation for the greater good, and that each one of us has that spark of divineness on the inside that is unique. Empowering leadership, I want my employees to feel they have control over their work. You're trying to empower them, and by the time you're all done, you have a belief that they have control over their own work. I'm ready to do the right thing, and the right thing is a big deal with the aspect of servant leadership. We have moved to leaders of more often being a coach than a boss, and we need to stand side by side with employees to get the work done. That is the core of servant leadership. It's a tough road. If you want to embrace it, there really is an opportunity, maybe now more than ever, as the supervisors have shifted from becoming the boss to being the coach. Maybe now is the time to adopt the concept of servant leadership. Take care.